May the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts, and the actions of our lives be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Hello, Trinitarians. This is my Bible. It is a hand-me-down Bible that I got from a college friend who was just about to graduate when I first started taking religion classes. And by the time that I was headed off to seminary, the cover was so worn and torn and fragile that just after a few classes of New Testament, I had to secure it with packing tape. But I wanted to keep this Bible because the pages are so full of comments from the readers, known and unknown, who passed through its pages before me. Wherever I turn, there is always new layers of conversations going on. And so when I opened up to this week's gospel passage from Matthew, I couldn't help but chuckle at the comment left by a previous reader scribbled in the pages above this passage on forgiveness. It is a short, honest statement. All the reader left behind were 3 letters: WTF. Now, I appreciate this comment because it provides a pretty accurate and concise summary of the reactions of shock and disbelief that we encounter in this reading. For some context, this lesson picks up right after last week's gospel discussion of how to handle conflict and sin in Christian communities. If you remember, we are told that if one sins, we are to go to them and point it out in private. If they don't listen, we are to take a friend with us as we confront them again. And if they still don't listen, we are to go back once again with the whole community. So in this part of Matthew's gospel, this next section, we have Peter trying as hard as usual to integrate Jesus' teaching into his life practice. He asks Jesus, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive?" Now, according to the Jewish culture that shaped Peter, there was a common practice of forgiving a member 3 times. But here, once again, Peter puts himself out there, modeling for us just how to take a step forward in faith. We observe Peter trying to understand the complexities of what it means to live in this way of Jesus, wrestling to integrate the many times that he has observed Jesus fulfill and expand the common practices of religious law. Peter goes ahead and takes his guess a step further than the common practices. Stretching his own imagination, Peter guesses as many as 7 times, making his guess that we are to be really generous with our forgiveness. And while Peter tried to stretch, Jesus goes on to break open Peter's imagination. WTF, Peter might have thought. Jesus, you can't be serious. Now, depending on the biblical translation that you are reading, Jesus' answer might be either not 7 times, but 77 times. Or it might read, not 7 times, but 7 times 70. It is as if the translators and interpreters of the text had their very own response of shock. Could Jesus have really meant that we are to forgive one person as many as 490 times? Many texts go with 77. In either way, be it 77 or 490 times, it is too many to count. This is the point. We are not supposed to keep score. Forgiveness is not meant to be an act, but a lifestyle, an orientation. To further illustrate Jesus' astounding teaching, the evangelist Matthew leads us straight into another parable from Jesus about the kingdom of heaven that holds a few unbelievable twists of its own. It is a story about a servant who owes a king a debt of 10,000 talents. This is a jaw-dropping amount of money. 1 talent was the equivalent of a 15-year salary for the average first-century Israelite. His debt of 10,000 talents would take 150,000 years of wages to repay. It is an unfathomable and hopeless amount, an impossible debt to pay back. The servant is brought before the king, begs for mercy, and the king, in an act of jubilee, lets it go. And what happens next? The servant goes forth with this new sense of freedom and does something that shocks and horrifies his community. Seeing a fellow servant that owes him 100 denarii, he fails to extend the grace that was just shown to him. The forgiven servant handles his brother with brutality, demands payment, and refusing to extend an ounce of the grace that he just received, throws his fellow servant, into a debtor's prison over an amount that pales in comparison to his own forgiven debt. Jesus tells us that the king revokes his mercy for this unforgiving one. In the unforgiving servant, we come to see how counting and holding onto every little grievance and wrong hardens our hearts, keeps us from being transformed, and eventually entraps us in our own limited imagination, where we fail to live into a different and a better future. Peter's question and the following parable lead us to wrestle with more questions. We might even scribble in our own margins, WTF. This is too much to ask, too much to imagine. WTF. We ask, who to forgive, what to forgive, when to forgive, where to forgive, why to forgive. The parable makes it clear. We are to forgive our trespassers their trespasses all the time and anywhere because we have been forgiven. Upon the cross, where Jesus was betrayed, rejected, tried, beaten, and crucified, God took in the evil of the world, and instead of continuing the cycle and releasing the forces of evil back out into the world upon us in brutal vengeance, Jesus forgave, releasing love and compassion into the world instead. God released us from an unimaginable and hopeless debt. We are a people freed and sent forward to forgive, and we must believe in the realness of this forgiveness, this resurrection release, in order for us to truly live it and share it with others. We have to believe in our release in order for it to transform us so that we can release others. But let's be clear. Forgiveness is not an easy or quick process. Forgiveness is not the denial of harm or an act of forgetting. True forgiveness involves truth-telling and confession. It is not a shortcut to healing or an ending of pain. But forgiveness is a liberating act. Forgiveness is a beginning and an orientation towards the future. Nadia Bolz-Weber, an ELCA pastor, explains her own process of release in coming to understand forgiveness. She proposes that forgiveness, rather than being a pansy way of saying, it's okay, is actually a way of wielding bolt cutters and snapping the chains that link us. What if it's saying, she asks, what you did was not okay. I refuse to be connected to it anymore. She continues, forgiveness is about being a freedom fighter. And free people are dangerous people. Free people aren't controlled by the past. Free people laugh more than others. Free people see beauty where others do not. Free people are not easily offended. Free people are unafraid to speak truth to stupid. Free people are not chained to resentment, and that's worth fighting for. Forgiveness is the life of a Christian sustained by God. WTF. We try forgiveness. With God's help, we must try forgiveness. As the vehicles of God's grace and mercy in the world, we must try forgiveness. And again, friends, this is hard, especially in our world and time so divided. It is a process, it is a lifestyle to practice, and a future-oriented imagination to cultivate. With God's sustaining help, we try forgiveness. Siblings, may God give you the grace not to sell yourself short, grace to risk something big for something good, grace to remember that the world is now too dangerous for anything but truth and too small for anything but love. So may God take your minds and think through them. May God take your lips and speak through them. And may God take your hearts and set them on fire. In the name of the Creator, Redeemer, and Friend. Amen.